Bueno, buenas tardes. Vamos a empezar esta conferencia magistral, que es una conferencia colectiva. Es una conferencia que es una buena muestra del diálogo interregional que ha caracterizado a este tercer encuentro global sobre trabajos de cuidados. Y es una buena muestra, se van a dar cuenta cuando les presente a nuestras conferencistas. Tenemos a Simeoni, que es directora de Afrifem, Macroeconomics Collective en Kenia. Mora, Secretaria Ejecutiva de la Comisión Interamericana de Mujeres, de la CIM, en la Organización de Estados Americanos. Y tenemos a Kashen, que es directora de Women's Economic Justice en Century Foundation en Estados Unidos. Ellas van a compartir sus conocimientos con nosotras en un formato un tanto particular que ya hemos compartido previamente y que trata de que yo voy a leer una pregunta que cada una de ellas va a responder en tiempos muy cortos desde sus saberes y experiencias. Y luego vamos a abrir un espacio para el diálogo entre las conferencistas y también para preguntas y respuestas. Vamos a empezar, vamos a seguir el orden del programa como en los otros paneles que hemos tenido y entonces por Crystal, después Alejandra y Julie. Y la pregunta primera que tenemos en esta conferencia colectiva, como les digo, sobre Caminos a la Organización Colectiva de los Cuidados, es la siguiente. ¿De qué hablamos cuando hablamos de cuidado? ¿No? Desde sus países y desde sus comunidades. ¿Y qué significa para ustedes cuidar en un espacio comunitario? Adelante, por favor, Crystal.
Hi, everyone. Hi. Did we have a good lunch? Are we awake? Yeah, something. There we go. Now I can feel you. I hear you. My name's Crystal. I'm based in Nairobi, Kenya, and I work with NAWI. And we're Pan-Africans. We work regionally and global-facing as well. I identify as a Pan-African feminist, and so that's sort of the lens that I will be speaking from. And so this is a huge question, and I have 3 minutes. And I must admit, care sometimes doesn't quite translate well enough from where I'm from. It sometimes, most times, care really refers to back-breaking work that women do to sustain life, keep families, societies, communities, and even economies running and thriving. It's part of a social contract between us and our states. And Mignon Duffy last night, so beautifully put it. It is both labor and relationship. A labor and relationship we sometimes forget. And as horrible as COVID was, I really saw the relationship part come alive. So I'm trying to be hopeful here. We were all in various forms of lockdown, and I saw my mother's friends slowly reclaim themselves from the lives we all lived pre-COVID. Slowly, more and more people grew food of their own, and there was really a great barter system of fresh produce between them, which I'd never seen happen before. We all put care packages for the guy you bought your thrifted trousers from in the market, or your housekeeper who becomes like family. We all kind of took care of each other in ways that we'd never done before. In the middle of COVID, in a small town of Kenya as well, the local government announced that they had set up a child care center for the local market. They didn't call it a care initiative. They simply termed it as a new public service. And so this gave me some hope. But at the same time, the government announced that they were taking a home-based care approach to COVID. This was really because they didn't have enough hospital beds. And yet again, women were expected to subsidize the state. No mention of compensation, no mention of recognition. So on one hand, the recognition of home-based care as an alternative sounded really exciting, but again, it was nothing but words. So as bittersweet as COVID was, as I saw our communities reclaim ourselves, as I saw the words that we so many a time fight for to have in public policy, in public spending, again, it fell on emptiness. No financing for it, no real meaningfulness around having it as a strategy. And again, women were there to carry the burden of all of this. Thank you.
Muchas gracias y muchas gracias por el cuidado del tiempo. Entonces, bienvenida Alejandra, que me olvidé de decir que Alejandra además es costarricense. Adelante.
Bueno, muchas gracias. Un saludo a todas, bienvenida a nuestro terruño maravilloso y a nuestra alma mater. Gracias a la invitación, Juliana, y a todo el equipo en este proceso. Complementando un poco lo que Cristal dice, es difícil de definir qué es cuidado y sobre todo cuando lo estamos haciendo en un contexto tan complejo para las Américas. Un contexto en el que hay polarización política, un contexto de un auge de los discursos de antiderechos, un contexto de políticas de austeridad y nosotros colocando el mainstreaming de cuidados surge y por eso es importante saber en dónde y cómo estamos colocando esta reflexión. Desde una perspectiva de cuidados, y si lo leemos a cuidados dentro de la lógica del patriarcado y de la cultura que estamos viviendo, es evidente que lo que tenemos es que el cuidado refleja la lógica de la segmentación, de la jerarquización y de la especialización, y que ha estado asignado en el mundo de lo privado fundamentalmente las mujeres con la penalidad de género que eso tiene. Y planteo esto porque nosotras como Comisión Interamericana de Mujeres venimos señalando que lo que hay que hacer para transformar el mundo de lo público, y que es una hipótesis feminista, es politizar lo que sucede en el mundo de lo privado, llevarlo al mundo de lo público y transformar desde esa lógica. Y quiero decirles que la ruta que hicimos hace 29 años, cuando hicimos Belén do Pará, en el marco de la Comisión Interamericana de Mujeres, y de la mano de las voces de las mujeres expertas, fue, uno, desnaturalizar eso que venimos haciendo. Y eso pasó con la violencia, desnaturalizarla, no es parte de la foto cotidiana. Y eso es lo que hay que hacer con cuidados, porque como lo hemos hecho milenariamente, parece que está ahí instalado y que está resuelto, y que la elasticidad, oh my God, del tiempo va a estar ahí presente de forma inmutable. Entonces, bueno, hay que hacer eso. Luego, hacer la ruptura misma que se hizo en el recorrido de Belén do Pará con violencia, que es la ruptura de la dicotomía entre lo público y lo privado, y que lo público tiene una dimensión distinta y que lo privado no era parte del Estado. Y ahí brinco a decir que entonces hay que convertirlo en un derecho, porque cuando lo convertimos en un derecho, y aquí cuando estoy hablando de convertirlo en un derecho, estoy señalando que hay varios titulares y varias titulares del derecho. Primero, las poblaciones que requieren la necesidad de tener cuidados. Y aquí hay diversos tipos de poblaciones. Y luego, quien ejerce el cuidado, porque ejercer el cuidado requiere una serie de dimensiones y de derechos. Y quiero decirles que el marco desde nuestra lógica para trabajarlo es en el marco de diseño de política pública, pero particularmente construcción de marcos jurídicos profundos. Sobre esto, la Comisión ha construido una ley modelo de cuidados que en la primera parte lo que hace es definir los cuidados, y hay una definición que parte de un concepto que también quiero dejar aquí solo para la discusión, que es el tema de la interdependencia de las personas, de los seres humanos. No podemos seguir hablando solamente en primera persona. Y bueno, y termino esta idea con esto, dado la rapidez del tiempo. Gracias.
Gracias, Alejandra. Adelante, por favor.
Thank you. Let me turn this down so I don't hear. Okay, great. I'm Julie Kashen. I'm the Director of Women's Economic Justice at the Century Foundation, a think tank based in New York and DC in the United States. And it is so exciting to be in a room filled with people who obsess about care as much as I do. So it's really good to be with all of you. I'm a US policy expert, so I'm going to start answering this question in the context of US policy. American sociologist Jessica Calerco said it really well, which is that other countries have social safety nets. The United States has women. But as I talk to so many people and I hear from my friends here, I actually think I would amend that, which is that a few lucky countries have social safety nets and most of us have women. In the United States, the focus on individualism, the very specific attack on the idea that government should play a role in anything that has to do with care and social aspects of life, the intersecting oppressions of sexism, racism, ageism, ableism, classism, and more, they've all been primary and have left families to fend for themselves and ensure that only the wealthiest Americans can actually afford to care for their loved ones or care for themselves. We have no comprehensive care infrastructure. We have piecemeal policies that reinforce gender inequality, economic inequality, silos, and divisions. We have a small child care policy for low-income families that is so underfunded that only 1 in every 9 eligible children actually have access to it. We have no paid parental leave, paid family leave, paid sick days nationally. None. We have a few states that have it. 11 out of 50 states have paid family and medical leave, which includes parental leave, time to care for your own serious illness, time to care for a loved one. Only 11 states out of 50. And as our baby boomers, our older population ages, we've got no plan. Nothing, not at all. We have a program that if you get rid of all of your assets, you may be lucky enough to get a little bit of support. That's about it. We have care workers who are paid poverty-level wages, and we have the majority of people who are just doing their best to care, provide for their families, and support their families. And what's basically that means is that it's an every family for themselves mentality. Mothers go back to work 2 weeks after they give birth. Grandparents age in nursing homes, congregate care settings that they do not want to be in against their own wishes. And every family is for themselves, and it feels that way. The pandemic made it worse, but also, as we all know, shone the light on what was missing, right? It finally made visible what had been invisible for so long. And that was, well, dads started helping with remote schooling and childcare and housework. Not as much as moms, don't worry, didn't get that good. And, people started bringing their aging parents home from nursing homes. Children popped up on work video calls regularly, literally making obvious working and parenting all at once. And as a result, something unprecedented happened. The United States built care policies in childcare, paid leave, and home and community-based services. And I'll tell you more about it when it's my turn next.
Bueno, muchas gracias. Antes de pasar a la siguiente pregunta, les invito a, si tienen preguntas, valga la redundancia, las anoten en una hojita de la libretita que tienen ustedes, y hay 2 colegas que van a estar recogiendo las preguntas que tengan. Entonces, están invitadas a hacerlo. La siguiente pregunta son varias preguntas a la vez, y que yo invito a nuestras conferencistas a responder uno u otro énfasis según sus áreas de expertise y sus perspectivas, ¿no? ¿Qué falta en los debates y en los discursos en torno al cuidado? ¿Qué perspectivas y aspectos del cuidado comunitario faltan en los debates actuales sobre organización social del cuidado? ¿Y qué regulaciones y políticas, incluyendo medidas fiscales y financieras, deberían apoyar a las lógicas comunitarias del cuidado? Como digo, son varias preguntas en una. No es la idea responderlas todas, sino en función de sus preferencias y de su área de expertise. Aquí sí tenemos un pelín más de tiempo, 4 minutos. Adelante, Cristal, por favor.
4 minutes. So for me, all oppression is linked. And really what misses sometimes, at least in the spaces that I occupy, is the links to the macro level economic considerations and linkages. So the economy is really how fairly our governments collect revenue. And in my country, they zero rate helicopters, but tax books. And so you can see where our government's priorities lie. And also how equitably they distribute it. Do they spend on maternal care budgets, budgets for elderly care, or do they spend on mega infrastructure projects, which seem to be the priority in many African countries, really influenced by external private finance pressures and really an unjust global economic framework that's based on white supremacy and the patriarchy. With so many African countries going through debt distress, we see the IMF signing new deals every day. Ghana just recently signed its 18th program with the IMF. The 17 before have all promised reprieve at the end, only to end up in the same exact debt cycle. With the IMF program comes drastic cuts in public spending, and so really no hopes for social infrastructure to get funded, let alone funded in any meaningful way. And so making sure our view of care, of social reproduction is intersectional, that takes a historical account, that it remains political, that it accounts for issues of race, of class, of ethnicity, of religion, and so many more intersections. That our narratives need to consider our differences. What is considered a household in different contexts? Is it mom, dad, 2.5 children, and a dog? Is it a family that eats together but not necessarily sleeps under one roof, maybe? At home, where I come from, my aunts, who I call my tatas, are really like my mothers. My cousins are my siblings. But I live in a structure that health insurance, for example, only sees dependents as immediate nuclear family, and so I can't have them on my health insurance. And this is only but one way that brings to light for me the clash between an imposition of a narrative within a system and the reality of how my community lives and operates. So the power of narrative, the definition of words that are used, definitely needs more care and attention. And the links to other forms of oppression, and for me, the economic, also needs a deep centering.
Voy a tratar de dar una perspectiva ligada al proceso que nos contaba nuestra compañera. Y es, bueno, si nosotros tenemos que hacer algo con cuidado, lo primero es sacarlo del mundo de lo privado para que esté en el mundo de lo público y que tenga el Estado como responsable del proceso. Y aquí quisiera ver en lo comunitario varios niveles, pero el primero sería la gobernanza local. Porque la gobernanza local, o sea, los gobiernos locales en la comunidad son los que administran todas las necesidades. Es la que está de la forma más inmediata, accesible a las personas. Y en la comunidad además es donde todo ocurre. Y tiene que ocurrir en la gobernanza local, convertir el tema de los cuidados en un mainstreaming. Y aquí, bueno, hay muchos niveles por los cuales tiene que empezar. El primero es diagnosticar qué es lo que pasa. ¿Dónde está la gente? ¿Cuáles son las necesidades que están ahí en función del territorio? Y lo decía bien nuestra compañera. ¿Cuáles son las personas que están ahí? ¿Cuáles son las necesidades que tienen? Y bueno, ¿y cuáles son particularmente las necesidades de cuidados, los recursos? Y ahí, desde ese lugar, puede empezar a diseñarse una política pública. Y una política pública que requiere de la participación de todas las personas y de otros actores, porque la realidad de hoy lo que plantea es que no hay una posibilidad de una sola institución de llevar adelante un proyecto de esta magnitud. Y entonces aquí surgen todas las ideas de las alianzas público-privadas, de cómo los otros actores que además del Estado que tienen que participar, que es la empresa privada, que debería preocuparle si el cuidado está resuelto en cada una de las personas que llega a trabajar y que tiene que trabajar y producir y ser competitiva y generar competitividad para esa empresa, no lo puede hacer con una serie de preocupaciones sobre sus hombros y que tiene que responderlos de manera individual. Entonces, bueno, es como colectivizar todos estos temas y por eso los gobiernos locales, por ejemplo, pueden contratar servicios, hacer procesos en este sentido. Quiero contarles una cosa que sucedió en Costa Rica con algunos procesos, digamos, dentro de la gobernanza local, y es que se sacaron a concursos algunos de los servicios, los hombres ganaron, la mayoría de las empresas eran jefiadas por hombres y contrataron a las mujeres en subcontrataciones por debajo, digamos, de los estándares. Y eso me parece que no puede ser que demos toda esa vuelta para reivindicar los derechos de las mujeres y el cuidado como un tema colectivo y que volvamos desde otras formas a colocar a las mujeres siempre en la peor de las posiciones. Pero en esta cosa de lo comunitario también hay que construir el tema de la asociatividad entre las mujeres para poder brindar servicios de esta naturaleza. Y también coincido que lo macroeconómico es muy importante y en esto me parece que hay una serie de elementos que funcionan como incentivos para poder empujar un proyecto de esta naturaleza, por ejemplo, ventajas fiscales, a generar exoneraciones a empresas que tienen redes de cuidado, generar el tema de subvenciones, el tema de acceso a créditos diferenciados, facilidades en programas de cobertura de infraestructura. Es decir, hay una serie de elementos de naturaleza fiscal que pueden funcionar como acciones afirmativas para realmente construir ese andamiaje desde la gobernanza local, en alianza con la política pública y en alianza también con lo que está generando la multilateralidad, que está empujando con una gran fuerza en los temas de cuidados y que sigue siendo un motor de cambio de todo lo que pasa en los países. Gracias.
Muchas gracias.
So what I'm hearing and what I think about when I think about what's missing from the conversation or what needs to be central to it are two things, power and money. And we're hearing a lot of that here, right? So I'm going to start just sharing a little example, big example from the United States, which is that I don't know exactly when, but within the last few years, a coalition formed called Care Can't Wait. And Care Can't Wait brought together childcare, paid family and medical leave, home and community-based services, folks who were fighting for older adults, fighting for disabled people, labor unions, and others representing domestic workers, the National Domestic Workers Alliance. And I hope many of you have heard of Ai-Jin Poo, who is the brilliant mind behind so much of this. And so Care Can't Wait formed. And one of the ideas behind it is that we need to start thinking differently. We need to start thinking about our power collectively. We need to start thinking about things in abundance, not in scarcity. It's not either we get money for childcare or for older adults. It's not either we make sure that children are well taken care of or we pay higher wages. Those two things go hand in hand. You cannot have one without the other. And so by bringing all of these groups and interests together, that really increased the power of each individual group as well as the collective. So what that led to were two major policy progress pieces. Two major policies that moved forward. One is, during the pandemic, these temporary measures for childcare, paid leave, and home and community-based services. Significant, unprecedented levels of money, levels of funding put into these programs that allowed them to raise wages, both in childcare and long-term supports and services, that allowed them to have better stability for the childcare programs that we're running, for the home and community-based options to improve services for families, include more families, lower costs for families, to really take a government role in the provision of these types of services. These were amazing. They made a huge difference. Every single state received funding to improve these policies in those states. Families across the United States did better as a result. The emergency paid leave policies really stopped the spread of COVID in the places where they happened, right? This was huge, but it was temporary. And at the same time, we were fighting for a policy called Build Back Better. And in November of 2021, the United States passed this policy, this Build Back Better, with near universal childcare, with funding for home and community-based services for older adults and disabled people, with increased wages for the care workforce, and with guarantees of paid parental leave, paid medical leave. And then the Senate did not pass it. And so we remain without any of those policies. We went from temporary policies to the long-term sustainable funding that we needed, and then it just went away to nothing. And what that is to me is a story about the vicious cycle of institutionalized sexism and racism. Because basically what happens is, if women don't have childcare, if we don't have paid leave, if we don't have help with caring for our aging parents, our children with disabilities, we can't participate. We can't fully be a part of civic society. We can't run for office. We can't be activists. We can't register people to vote. Except, you know what? We do it anyway, right? But they make it so much harder. So I think this is really a story, as I said, about power and money. And I have so much more to say, but I'll keep to our time.
Muchas gracias. La siguiente pregunta es igual de sugerente que las anteriores. ¿Qué sueñan cuando sueñan, o qué sueñan para el cuidado? ¿Cómo sería el cuidado en sus sociedades, en nuestras sociedades, si dependiera de ustedes, en otras palabras? ¿Y qué papel creen que tiene en nuestras sociedades el cuidado comunitario? ¿Y qué otros actores ven involucrados? Seguimos el mismo orden. Cristal, adelante, por favor.
Sure, I have 3 minutes now, right? Okay.
Yes, 3 minutes.
To dream.
Thanks.
So for us at NAWI, dreaming is central to the work that we do, and it's political. It must be political. Dreaming has to be untethered to the ways of the world that we exist in. So we have to have the bravery and the audacity to unshackle ourselves from that and reimagine something completely different. And dreaming means not, abandoning log frames and work plans, because real dreaming means you have no idea where you're going to land. Arundhati Roy talked about COVID being a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. And a friend and colleague, Leah Erienu, has spoken about how some of us have gone through that portal and continue as per before, like the American government. And some of us have dared to dream of a different future, like so many of us here. And so really, when I think about dreaming, I think of Lola Olufemi, who wrote a really great article called Why Imagination is the Most Powerful Tool That Feminists Have at Our Disposal. And in it, she speaks about feminism being a political project about what could be. And I end by quoting her. Imagine this, a world where the quality of your life is not determined by how much money you have. You do not have to sell your labor to survive. Labor is not tied to capitalism, profit, or wage. Borders do not exist. We are free to move without consequence. The nuclear family does not exist. Children are raised collectively. Reproduction takes on new meanings. In this world, the way we carry out dull domestic labor is transformed, and nobody is forced to rely on their partner economically to survive. The principles of transformative justice are used to rectify harm. Critical and comprehensive sex education exists for all from an early age, and we're liberated from the gender binaries, strangling grip, and the demands it places on our bodies. Imagine this vision not as utopian, but as something well within our reach.
Muchas gracias. Y le sobró tiempo. Adelante, Alejandra, por favor.
Bueno, me gusta eso de que soñar es político Y quisiera decir que las feministas hemos soñado y hemos transformado el mundo. No hay un movimiento tan poderoso en el mundo ni tan transformador como el feminismo, sin uso de una sola arma, sin uso de nada que sea a la fuerza. Hemos ido evolucionando y me parece que estamos haciendo del cuidado una ruta para esa transformación. Y que sí tenemos que seguir trabajando en alianzas, perfeccionando esa ruta. Me parece que un elemento fundamental en ese sueño del cuidado es que se reconozca como lo que es, como un trabajo. Y eso significa una gran reinterpretación del concepto de trabajo, no solo como transformación de bienes y servicios, sino como transformación reproductiva. Cuando incidimos ahí, lo que estamos es incidiendo en el mainstreaming del patriarcado, en la segmentación sexual del trabajo. Y por eso es tan básico hacer eso. Después de hacer eso, podemos además generar políticas públicas en el estado de bienestar. En nuestra región, 26 constituciones de nuestra región, de las Américas, tienen el tema del bienestar. Y este bienestar en general comprende políticas de universalidad, de educación, salud, pensiones, en algunos lugares, por lo menos en Costa Rica sí lo es, y lo que hay que generar es un cuarto peldaño del tema de cuidados y de recibir fondos de pensión porque estas mujeres han trabajado y porque hay que reconocerlo desde ese lugar. Es decir, hay una serie de elementos de transformación que son importantísimos y que lo estamos haciendo a través de esto. Luego quisiera decir que en la práctica también cuando uno va por la región puede encontrar cosas maravillosas que se están haciendo. Quisiera traer, por ejemplo, y compartir la experiencia de las manzanas de cuidado de Bogotá. Y además hay que oír a esta poderosa mujer alcaldesa señalando cómo ella no era experta en género, se sienta y oye lo que las mujeres le están diciendo y cómo ninguna de ellas tiene resuelto el cuidado y se empezó a dar cuenta. Solo hay que ser un poco inteligente y observar un poco, aunque no tenga trayectoria feminista, para entender lo que significa el cuidado, y empezó a organizar manzanas para responder y atender los servicios. Mientras se cuidaba a los niños, ellas podían salir a trabajar, a educarse, a esparcimiento. Es decir, hay una lógica donde por cada determinada cantidad de población se organizan las manzanas, se dan servicios gratuitos para estudiar, emprender, para descansar, para ejercicios, se da atención médica, se da atención psicológica, jurídica. Sí, las manzanas de cuidado de Bogotá logran brindar tiempo y servicios y reducen la sobrecarga de cuidado de las mujeres y le dan mejores oportunidades a las mujeres. También hay un proyecto que podría ser interesante, que se inscribió en la Comisión Interamericana de Mujeres como un tema de buena práctica, que era un programa comunitario de cuidado comunitario en Argentina, que recibía apoyo financiero a ciertos proyectos de economía popular. Es decir, podemos encontrar lugares donde esto ha funcionado y nos damos cuenta que no es un sueño, sino que son realidades y que lo que requieren es de una profunda perspectiva de género, de entender las necesidades diferenciadas, de hacer acciones afirmativas y de colocar la voluntad política en ese lugar.
Muchas gracias. Adelante.
I'm going to give you my policy answer and my woo-woo answer. Does woo-woo translate in Spanish? So in terms of public policy, I want to see the United States government build a robust care infrastructure. I want all of our governments to build a robust care infrastructure, actually. And to me, this is a publicly funded system that recognizes care as both an individual and a social responsibility. It values and compensates care workers and supports family members to both provide care and support financially for each other. That includes child's care, it includes leave time, it includes care for older adults and disabled people, it includes investing in the workforce. And then I also dream of the bigger changes that we need in our culture, and as she said last night, our morals, in order to achieve this. So one of my favorite thinkers, Glennon Doyle, not an academic, she wrote in her book, "For those of us who are not consulted in the building of the visible order, igniting our imagination is the only way to see beyond what was created to leave us out." That's why I love what Crystal said and painted that picture of that imagining. And Tricia Hershey, another activist, writes in Rest is Resistance, "I know that my visualizations of what a world without capitalism and oppression looks like is based on something I have never experienced in this lifetime. It is dream work and alchemy." So I think it's time. It's time for imagination and dream work and alchemy. What if the most evolved part of me, the most authentic part of me, could really see and speak to the most authentic and evolved part of you? And then together we connected with each other around this room, and then outside of this room, and with the earth, and with whatever spirit means to you. What if we all imagine connecting, right, outside of just our laws or our research or academics, but really getting into more of what I would even call a spiritual power? That's what it's going to take for us to build the care that we want to build. And so I want to invite you to share a little call and response with me. I'm going to say something and ask you to repeat it. So, the light in me salutes the light that shines so brightly in all of you. This is something that my yoga teacher says, probably yours too. And I just think we need to get into our humanity, to get kind of beyond the intellect, into our hearts, to know this is the future we are building, this is the future we want to see, and it's going to take all of us, and we can do it. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Tenemos 22 minutos para una ronda más de participaciones en función de las preguntas y respuestas. Que habían sido muchas. Las preguntas, por lo que veo, no dicen, hay algunas que dicen para quién son dirigidas, las otras no, entonces las que no dicen para nadie, quien se sienta interpelada o quien quiera contestar. Si quieren las leo todas y después hacemos una ronda de intervenciones y preguntan las que escojan, ¿sí? En mi Spanglish. How do you keep the care in care work, especially when we desperately need to uphold family cohesion and values? How models do you vision? This one is for Julie. ¿Cuál considera que es la razón por la cual no existe la necesidad de articular las políticas y programas que ofrecen cuidados? ¿Podría repetir el nombre de las iniciativas propuestas en respuesta al COVID-19? ¿Podría hacer un balance sobre los costos y consecuencias en relación al cuidado sobre poder y dinero? Para Alejandra. Do you have some good examples of local government innovation in care and care programs? Otra más. ¿Cómo reconciliaríamos la propuesta de Alejandra acerca de la importancia de qué son los cuidados y que estén manejados a nivel local con lo que plantea Julie en el caso de Estados Unidos, donde el gran problema es justamente la falta de una política nacional que evite que gobiernos locales anticuidados, antiderechos, sigan devaluando los cuidados? Qué buena pregunta. Dos más. Esta es para Crystal. Can you say a little more about why the concept do care doesn't translate English in the African context? Y la última. Entiendo que las políticas y el concepto de cuidados están concentrados en un concepto de familia biológica y desde una perspectiva heteronormativa. ¿Cómo se podrían ampliar estos marcos para incluir a otros grupos desde el cuidado? Y eso es todo. O sea, no sé cómo van a contestar, eligen. Adelante, por favor, en el mismo orden, si les parece. Empezamos con Crystal. Adelante, Crystal.
So I'll start with the one that was directed at me, how the concept of care doesn't translate into the African context. So we're about 54 countries on the continent with different histories. We've got Francophone, Anglophone, Arab-speaking, Lusophone, all with their historical baggage of colonialism, a mishmash of cultural colonialism versus trying to figure out who we are and what our identities are. The translation of care in many of our languages seems a bit fluffy sometimes. When I speak to policymakers, even women policymakers, the response is always, wait, you're trying to get me to stop taking care of my family? Like, what does that even mean? And so it's really hard to translate it, especially when so much of the work that's being done by women in social reproduction is backbreaking work. It's collecting water, it's carrying firewood, it's taking care of sick children, of older people, it's building houses. It's all of that that is contributing to economy, is contributing to upholding societies, families, and economies, is continuously ignored, but continuously expected to be the role of women culturally, whatever that means. We're also struggling with the role of the state. Working in Pan-African spaces, global facing, it's a lot of work to continuously defend the role of the African state against a push of a global economic order that pushes this narrative that the African state is incapable of providing for her own. You mirror that with working with very local organizations who see the state as oppressive, as continuously violent, especially on women's bodies. And so defending the role of this very same state is a tumultuous task and one that is very contradictory in nature. But there's a need to understand that most of our states have a very colonial baggage that they carry and use the very same tools, structures, and strategies that our colonial past used on us. And so the real role is trying to decolonize the state at the same time as upholding the role of the state. And that's a really complicated and complex space to exist in. And within this, notions of care with regards to how the state can provide come under deep question. And so I think, I like to speak about social reproduction. It seems more encompassing. Care is a part of that. But social reproduction covers a little bit more. There's a role of agriculture. For example, women produce over 60% of Africa's food in small-scale farms. That conversation, I think it was Karina in the morning who talked about, our ability to have ownership of land, of the soils that grow our food, of water that is able to nourish the soils and the food that we grow, of our sovereignty to choose what we grow. Kenya, where I live in, has lost over 400 types of indigenous vegetables from our diet. That's a food sovereignty issue. In its place, we have colonial dredges of cabbage and very white, it's our staple ugali, which is like a maize meal. And so all of these are interconnected and deeply political. But again, when we say care, it doesn't quite sometimes translate. I don't know how to say care in Swahili, which is the national language of Kenya. I don't know how to say care in Kikuyu, which is my mother's language. I do know how to say work, though. And so maybe there needs to be And I know there's been a long fight to have care recognized in global narratives and spaces, but I think we're not all there. I think we're all fighting the same war, but the battles are very different, and we need to be cognizant of that. And I think, it's a lot of listening to what's happening on the ground, and I think sometimes we don't do that enough, definitely not as civil society. We sometimes are gatekeepers to conversations and narratives and technicalizing a lot of the work that we do. But part of the dreaming is also looking at how we can reimagine the conversations, the narratives, and the words that we use. And maybe they're not universal sometimes. Maybe they're context specific. And that's something that is a challenge to all of us.
Bueno, yo comparto que cuando repensamos el cuidado en relación con el rol del Estado, hay resistencias en muchos de nuestros estados de la región. Y eso es un desafío. Y por eso creo que también es un desafío para quienes queremos una transformación, que hemos venido, por ejemplo, interpelando la democracia. Últimamente vemos toda la resignificación que hemos hecho de la mano de la democracia. Hemos inventado conceptos paralelos como paridad para decir democracia paritaria. Le hemos puesto el apellido de representatividad para decir por qué tenemos que estar ahí. Hemos hablado de otros tipos de gobernanza y creo que hay que hacer una profunda discusión sobre el Estado. Y cómo en esos principios del Estado y cómo está la lógica de cuidados y qué significan los cuidados en esos principios. Quiero decirles que hay un documento de la Comisión Interamericana de Mujeres hecha por 9 mujeres feministas que hicimos en conjunto un decálogo sobre el Estado en clave feminista que puede contribuir en algo sobre esto y que bueno, el cuidado se ve desde 3 dimensiones: cuidar la madre tierra, cuidar el bienestar de las personas en general y a las personas en lo individual, y que desde esta lógica se hace una aproximación, digamos, a las responsabilidades del Estado. Luego, me parece muy importante señalar que este concepto de cuidados lo hemos venido, digamos, llevando de las familias al Estado, a las comunidades. Tiene unas dimensiones enormes, hemos venido descubriéndole unas dimensiones enormes y creo que también si lo llevamos en esa resignificación que estamos haciendo de dotar de politicidad a lo que sucede en el mundo de lo privado, cuando lo llevamos al nivel de lo público y de la política pública, tiene también una resignificación como una ética política del quehacer político. Es decir, hemos venido reivindicando que el mayor arte de gobernar es cuidar a las personas y no hacer la guerra. Es decir, que hay toda una resignificación en torno a este concepto que también es importante, es estratégico, es políticamente correcto, todas esas cosas. Yo recuerdo que cuando hablábamos de esto al inicio, no sé, alguna gente decía, pero es que vamos a ir a hablar de un pedacito ahí para cuidar. No entendían la dimensión con lo que hemos venido transformando este concepto, y por eso tenemos que hacer mucho trabajo para llevarlo a todos los espacios. En alguna pregunta hablaban un poquito cómo ligar lo local con lo nacional, y yo diría que aquí estoy hablando de un triángulo que empieza con lo multilateral, insisto, porque a pesar de las dificultades, por ejemplo, en el marco de la Organización de Estados Americanos, que es donde trabajo y está la Comisión Interamericana de Mujeres, y a pesar de la polarización existente y de las dificultades para llegar a acuerdos, sigue siendo el lugar donde se construye los marcos jurídicos, los grandes consensos, el lenguaje, y ahí es de donde ahora en la Conferencia de la Mujer, en los distintos espacios que vamos generando, ponemos instrumentos y en todos hay y aparecen los temas de cuidados. Y la otro nivel es cómo el diseño de la política pública siempre estuvo colocado en lo nacional y poco tenía que ver con lo local. Pero cuando tenemos la conciencia clara de que todo ocurre en lo local. Si no articulamos con lo nacional, e insisto, con lo multilateral, esto tiene unas grandes rupturas. Y me parece que ahí está una clave, digamos, del diseño, de la articulación y de que responda a las grandes políticas diseñadas y que coloque. Además, lo local tiene la maravilla de colocarlo sobre las necesidades de las personas, sobre lo que escucha, sobre lo que sienten, y entonces ahí es donde se hace un match que puede empezar a funcionar. De algún modo lo recoge el concepto de mainstreaming, que fue diseñado desde Beijing, ¿verdad? Que era llevar todas nuestras necesidades al centro del quehacer de la política, es colocar cuidados en esta dimensión y en estas 3 dimensiones. Me parece que hay una ruta ahí posible para poder hacerlo, como lo hemos hecho, insisto, con otros temas, y que ha resultado. Gracias.
I will start with a question about biological families and heteronormative contexts, because my friends, especially those who work on paid family and medical leave, which again is paid parental leave, paid family care, they've thought a lot about this, and paid sick days too, and have created some model definitions where you are granted leave, paid leave, to care for your loved ones if you have a close affinity with someone. So it's beyond the biological context, it's beyond a heteronormative context, it's just close affinity. Beyond that, there has been language around siblings and in-laws and caring for stepchildren and step-parents. And so there's been a lot of thought given to how you have a most inclusive family definition so that we can honor the care needs of every relationship in your life. Not to say that's policy, but in some states they have adopted that. So there is some progress there. In terms of what I was talking about, we had the CARES Act, which was the first pandemic response that we had that included some childcare funding. We had another bill that I can never remember what it was called, Consolidated Reconciliation, something like that. And then we had the American Rescue Plan. And so the American Rescue Plan is what had the most significant dollars for childcare and home and community-based services. It's one of the first things that President Biden signed into law when he became president. And that's been a really big deal. And then the other policy that we got so close on for more permanent funding is the Build Back Better plan. And that's what did not happen. And so transitioning from there into the federal and local context, what we wanted from the Build Back Better plan was the significant federal dollars that we need to run the local programs that we want to run, because this is expensive work. Right now, it's expensive. We pay for it, on the mental health, the physical health, the exhaustion of women. But what we should be doing is having government dollars, national federal dollars, going into pay for this work. And so that's the vision. But at a congressional hearing recently, the Republicans in the congressional hearing had a set of talking points where they just kept saying, you want a one-size-fits-all childcare policy for America, and you're going to get everyone to turn trans. This was what they were trying to say. And it's just their talking points because they know that that might turn some people off in America. But reality is, what we're saying is, what we want is the funding that's going to allow us to have the context in each community to build what we really need. Because each community is not going to be able to spend the money themselves, but they know what they need and they can figure it out on their own if they have the resources from the federal government. So that's what we mean, I think, in making those connections.
Muchísimas gracias. Muchísimas gracias a nuestras conferencistas. Ha sido una sesión, creo que realmente súper interesante, que nos vamos muy motivadas. Creo que en algo debo interpretar ahí el sentimiento común. Como nota final, yo decir que en medio de esta diversidad, cuando hablamos de caminos para la colectivización del cuidado, que era el título de la sesión que nos convocaba, no podemos dejar de hablar, incluso hablando de cuidado comunitario, no dejamos de demandar un Estado cuidador, incluso frente a un Estado opresor y colonial, que le comento ahí a Cristal, eso es algo común en muchísimos países de América Latina, ¿no? Entonces, me parece que hay muchos mensajes que podemos sacar de esta diversidad de la cual hemos disfrutado, pero no me resistía a comentar ese como nota de cierre. Muchas gracias y nuevamente y un aplauso, por favor, para la conferencista. Perdón, Cristal pide 2 minutos y como ella hizo tan buen uso del tiempo, incluso habló de menos, se los vamos a dar. Adelante, go ahead.
Thanks. I just wanted to leave you with the words of one of my sisters, not a real sister, but like, a sister in arms. And her name is Nabila Abdul Malik. And I'm so honored to be here with so many of you that are doing amazing work. Every time we're having coffee or tea, I'm kind of just blown away. And so I'll read a few sentences from her work, from a book she's written on I'll Spare You Spinsterhood, and reminds me of this, of everybody in this room. There's no such thing as microwave love. Love needs time. It's like haris. Haris is not a dish you rush. Do you remember when your mother used to make it? How she would leave it overnight on the stove, and then in the morning stir and stir till her arms hurt. Blisters would form on her hands. We'd all take turns with a wooden spoon, and under her keen supervision, here Abba stops and smiles at the memory, blinking tears away. Make sure the meat was well meshed with the grains. That's love, Hubi. I pray that you will be fortunate like I was to meet someone you can make haris with. And so I'm really honored to make haris with all of you. And it's, love takes time, and so really honored to walk the journey.
Muchas gracias.